Can I get a good amen in this house?
Ready or not, here we go.
You can't hide. I'm gonna find you and take it. I don't know the words.
Slowly. That's all right. We got enough.
Isn't that right?
We got enough for the recording, so we got enough to hold you hostage for a little bit.
Ready or not.
All right. Well, welcome to the Good Amen podcast. We are joined by everyone's favorite guest.
That's
Pastor
right.
Lauren Kennedy here.
The real senior pastor.
The real senior pastor of Open Door Church.
You're using me for ratings.
Oh, by far. It is.
Yeah, we got to bump the ratings up for sure.
Trying to get this podcast
the Good
on the
Amen
map.
is still in its infancy stage, and we're trying to get
That's right.
the
Bringing
explosion
in the big
starts
hitters.
now.
That's right.
So to reveal the veil, Pastor Aaron holds the senior pastor title and the face of senior pastor. Pastor Lauren is senior pastor who calls all the shots and does all
That's
the
correct. That's exactly right.
So,
she's the boss.
So everybody thinks Pastor Aaron's doing all the work, but it's actually Pastor Lauren.
I'm show pony.
That's
She's
right.
Oh my gosh.
But thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Pastor Lauren also hosts her own podcast, the Renew podcast with Pastor
Renew.
Gina.
Yep.
And
their ratings are much higher.
Yeah. We're trying to catch up to their
I'm bitter about it.
to their ratings.
We've rebranded this podcast trying to catch up. And still, but
We're
I do
trying.
have a good intro now. You all did a great intro.
That's right. Colby behind the scenes was tracking down a good intro to it, and so he did a great job with it. But thank you for being on here today.
Happy to.
You and Pastor Aaron go way back.
We do.
Yeah.
Had just a beautiful love story.
Oh yeah.
One for the ages.
Movies written about it.
That's right. But we are going to talk about today a topic that is not typically, that has become pretty taboo in the church world.
Yeah.
And it's become really, it's such an important topic. It's a topic that is been hijacked in modern culture, and people are hearing about this topic, seeing this topic from everywhere except for the church most of the time.
Yeah.
And that's the topic of healthy sexuality. And so we're going to jump right into it and how to really the holistic approach to healthy sexuality. So obviously talking about marriage and the relationship between a husband and wife, as well as how do you talk about sexuality with your children in an appropriate way, in a healthy way. And so we're going to jump into that. Pastor Aaron, you actually just recently went out with your 8-year-old son to talk about sexuality for the first time.
Yeah.
And so why do you, let me ask you this question to start us off. Why is it important to start that conversation so early in the life?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. So our mentors in our life several years ago, so David's first year in Little League is this year. Mm-hmm. And several years ago, when our oldest son, Wesley, he was 14, so he was, I think, 10 at that time.
Yeah, he's 14 now. He was 10.
That's right. And so they kind of talked to us about Little League and what he was getting ready to experience. And in Greenville Little League, it is 9-year-olds through 12-year-olds. So they're all on the same team. And what they made us aware of that we had not really thought about is that Wesley was going to be around older kids, and older kids talk about things.
Yep.
And so I remember having this conversation with them and us realizing that we wanted to be the first ones to mention sex to our kids, not culture, not social media, and not their friends.
Yeah.
And so it just became very important that I wanted that conversation, that dialogue, to get open between me and my sons, and I wanted them to have that ability to have that same dialogue with their mom, you know. And so we did this trip with Wesley many years ago, and we kind of opened it up, talked about it. Don't go into brass details, but I go into enough details that make them a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit processing. They're like, really? Because what's inevitable.
You do what?
You do what? And it feels good? Yes, it does. All right. And it really is, how we just laughed. That's what we're going for, is that sex doesn't need to be an uber serious topic with them. It needs to be something that they can giggle about and laugh about, because the best sex happens with your spouse when you're having fun.
Yeah.
And so it's really beginning the process of having dialogue with them. And as Wesley's gotten older, that dialogue has changed and grown. And now there's honest conversations, deep conversations.
Well, I think it's important, too, to mention that it's an ongoing conversation.
That's right.
This isn't, something that you just talk about once and you just check off a list. I mean, I think that's the goal, is to be able to have open communication all the time. All the time
with them. And if they have questions, I want them to feel absolutely free to come talk to me. And one of the main things I talk to them about when we have these conversations is slang. Mm-hmm. Sexual slang, because a lot of times what people don't realize is somebody will say something. So it's funny because both of them, I asked this question before we even had the conversation. It's like, hey, let's talk about sex. I was like, do you know what sex is? And both of them said, yes, I know what sex is. And I was like, well, tell me what it is. And they were wrong. Okay. They had no idea. And so even from that standpoint, you begin to realize that they're feeling social pressure to understand what it is, and they're already hearing things about it, but they don't actually know the context of it.
And most of it's incorrect.
Yeah, exactly. And so really it's kind of saying, all right, if you have any questions, some kid come up to you and drop something on you or say, you know what this is, or you seen this, I want you free to come talk to me about it so that I can help you understand it. And the other thing is that we don't want them thinking sex is dirty, and we're raising two boys. We don't know what it means to raise two girls or girls. I mean, if I had a girl, I'd probably put a chastity belt on them, throw away the key, lock them in a room somewhere in this day and age. But with two boys, we know that hormones are real. We know that desire is God-given. And we know we're also living in a day and age where it's very difficult to live a pure life. Mm-hmm. And so how do we get into the struggle with them instead of make the struggle the enemy? I want to make the enemy the right enemy. I don't want to make the enemy the wrong enemy. And there's a lot of times where shame comes in and it really begins to destroy who they are as people. Yep. And it doesn't have to do that.
Because the desire is good. It's healthy. Right. It's God-given, which is what you said. And I remember your mom, I should have pulled up the title of this series of books, but it kind of walks you through the conversation with your kid age by age. Yeah. But it really is the power of first mention and that first impression, and that being you as a parent and not some other kid on the baseball field, because it's likely not right.
Yeah. And I think, what we want to do for our sons is we want to model healthy sexuality for them. Mm-hmm. So we want to have a house where they see me appropriately engaging with Lauren.
And they cringe.
And they cringe. You know what I'm saying? I want them to see me touch her, kiss her.
Wesley will come downstairs and go right back upstairs.
Yeah, that's right. You go back. I own this house. You know what I'm saying? And the sooner you leave here, the more we're able to walk around naked. But so really getting to that place of them seeing healthy sexuality, because that's the greatest gift we can give them, is for them to know, like, this is what marriage is and meant to be. And I think Lauren and I have had to do a lot of work to get to that place because of some of the mistakes we made early on in our life. And so we want that to be ground that they're able to even take more of in our family, instead of having to repeat the mistakes that we made.
Well, I think inevitably, whether you like it or not, you're modeling marriage before your kids.
Yeah, it's good.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. And I know Pastor Jimmy Evans talks a lot about that. Yeah. And I remember, and I mean, just a full transparency to bring context, my parents divorced later on in life, and I was an adult at the time. But growing up, I mean, I saw my parents very affectionate with each other. They spent a lot of time together. They took trips together. And we knew, my brother and I, that, you know, there was a lot of love there at the time. And that's not everything, because marriage takes work. But growing up, I knew what it was, or had that modeled for me, to know what it is to have a husband that loves you, that leads you, that opens doors, that treats you with respect. And so that was easy for me to fall in love with somebody who did all those things. And so but there's bad stuff that we model too, because we're not perfect people.
That's right.
But I will say this, another thing that Jimmy Evans talks about a lot is, oftentimes as young parents, you know, you may want to pull back with arguing in front of your kids. And there's a way to do it. So I'm not saying like, hey, just air out all your dirty laundry in front of all your kids. But it is a place for them to see, what does conflict resolution look like? What does it look like to disagree but come into unity and have hard conversations? Because they need to know that too. Yeah. It's not real for them to grow up and think, oh, well, marriage is just butterflies and sunshine and nobody ever argues.
That's right.
And so there's a good and a bad for them to see, but it should all be God's design for marriage.
That's right.
And how he is the center of our marriage, even in the hard times.
Yeah. I think for us, you know, we're two passionate people, and I'm wrong very rarely.
We're both firstborn, so.
So passionate is a way to just say we argue really strongly. It can get very loud sometimes. And listen, some of that's not right. I mean, you know, we're not necessarily proud of it, but what I will say is that we want to make up to the extent that we argue.
That's good.
So if my kids see me fighting, which is a part of life, you know, and are we fighting against each other? Are we fighting for each other? What are we fighting for? And sometimes we're doing both. I mean, we're human. We want them to see us make up. We want to see the reconciliation of whatever we're in.
Yeah.
And for us, in our opinion, that's modeling health for them. So I don't want them to feel like, hey, mom and dad never argue, so when I get married, then if I argue, then our marriage sucks and I just need to go find somebody else. That's terrible. But the truth is, there's a lot of parents that live under the pressure of being perfect. And the fact is, we can't be perfect. I mean, I feel like parenting is a journey of learning how bad you are. Right. Like, nobody's good at it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, even the people who I think are good at it, they don't think they're good at it. And so the only people who think they're good at it are people with 1-year-olds.
Calm 1-year-olds.
Calm 1-year-olds, right? I mean, like, I'm like, everything I think is theory. Like, I mean, even for us, we have a 14-year-old, right? So we haven't even lived through the older teenage years, the college years, having to figure out, you know, how to love the person that they decide to marry, how to deal with all that. We don't have any context for that. What we do have is a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old son that we're raising in a highly...
Not at 18.
Oh, 8, yeah.
8. Sometimes he thinks he's 18.
His attitude is 18. Yeah, seriously. Because he's a lot like Lauren.
Oh, my God. Well, he'll turn out to be great.
Yeah, he has a great smile and a great personality. Very passionate.
Very strong-willed.
Strong-willed, that's right. But, you know, that's what we have. But we're raising these boys in a highly sexed culture that Wesley doesn't have to go look for pornography. Right. It comes to his doorstep. Mm-hmm. He's seen things that I was 16, 17, and 18 and had to go look for. He's already seen it because it just comes to him. And so if we're not, as parents, engaging in this conversation, in our opinion, as early as 8 years old, we're behind.
Right.
And if I have the conversation and they feel like I'm unsure about it, then we're already putting them in a space of knowing that something is off. Sex needs to be safe. It needs to be the home needs to be a safe place to talk about sex and have fun. And if I'm able to get to that talk first, then and culture second, then we're already winning the game.
Well, because it's such a good point to be able to, and it all goes back to Scripture. The Pastor Lauren, I think you mentioned the law of first mention and all of that, but really it's so easy now to get behind the 8 ball and be reactive to everything. And if you don't start young, even before 8 years old, like you are talking about, modeling these things, then you begin you as a parent can feel like your hair's on fire just reacting to everything.
Well, the truth is, like,
or I've seen other parents too and had conversations where they just put their head in the sand and they're like, well, if I don't talk about it, I don't have to deal with it.
I've literally had people ask me, like, would you talk to my kid about sex? And I'm like, no, I'm not talking to your kid about sex.
Right.
I mean, they're going to hear me talk about it from the stage, but I'm not going, because, and here's the deal. It's like, there's so many marriages that it's a hard conversation.
Right.
So, like, the reality is like, parents put in the work. You know, like, we're all different ages. We've all come from different things. We have a purity culture on one side of the church. Purity culture teaches us, don't talk about sex. If you have sex, you're bad.
What I grew up in.
That's right.
So I know, which I was thinking when you said 8 is so young to talk about it, I was thinking back when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and they would, talk about it in health class. Of course, I went to public school, but I know that was a little bit different for you. You were homeschooled. But I remember thinking back, like, I didn't mean that as a dig. I really didn't. I didn't mean that as a dig. But how old were you? Do you remember?
Well, see, my dad was different because my dad started engaging me in conversation when I was young. So my dad and I always had a very open dialogue about sex. And it's partly because he was a pastor, so he had to talk. I mean, it is real that most marriages struggle in sex, money, because both of those are about control. So if you don't really understand that, like, the reason why we battle about it is since the fall, husbands and wives have been trying to fight for control. That's what the curse was. So when we live into the curse of the original sin, we're living into fighting for control, and those two things are the thing that dictate the most control. And so, my dad forever counseled people on that, and so he just was very open to talk about it. I mean, my dad did our marriage counseling. I mean, like one of my dad's best, most grossest lines in marriage counseling. This is what he said. He said, "So when y'all are bumping bellies," and I was like, "Don't say that. That's like the most unattractive sounding thing in the world." And I mean, he just would laugh about it. He was just crazy.
I think he liked to make you uncomfortable.
Oh, he loved to make me
all the hell that you put him through. I think he was like, "This is my moment."
He said, "Guess what, my time. I'm doing your marriage counseling, so get ready."
Every time I'm like, "Oh," but and so and I did have. In my teenage years, I led a pretty lascivious life, and I mean, I made a lot of mistakes sexually. It was definitely a wrestling point in my life. And Lauren and I made a lot of mistakes when we were dating. I mean, there was just a lot of things that we did outside of God's order. And so we have had to reestablish healthy sex in our marriage. But a lot of what we've walked through is putting in the work and learning skills that we didn't. I mean, just because it's modeled for you doesn't mean that you possess the skills to have the conversation.
That's true.
And there's probably no place that the enemy tries to get into marriages more than in their sex life. And so how do we develop the skills? How do we talk about sex on a regular basis so that there's joy and there's freedom? I mean, sex was created for joy. It was also created for reproduction, but it is meant to be pleasurable. And so how do we have these conversations when so many of us are either coming in from purity culture like we were talking about, or they're coming in from shame?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And they're feeling bad over what they have done. And then there's a lot of couples today that, they have sex, which before marriage, they have all these things. And so it's really hard for couples that have sex before marriage to then step into marriage and not realize that all this is different, because now there's a covenant involved. And so it's really hard to bring what happens outside of the covenant into the covenant and it be the same. It becomes very different, and they don't know how to deal with it or the shame they feel for what took place.
Well, I think that's the church's struggle over the years has been either they have really pushed purity culture, which in some sense is good, right? It's not like it's all bad. But what you get is a lot of people that step into marriage and sex that are just scared to death. Because they got no clue what's going on.
If I touch this person, I'm going to die.
Right. And it's like dating gets really weird then, and then marriage, and then you're just don't know what's going on.
Right.
Or you have the shame built around sex. So if you do something before marriage or outside of God's order, then you feel so much shame, and trying to come over those two things, shame and fear, are almost impossible a lot of times. And it ends up being years worth of work inside marriage to try to, overcome some of the things, rather than us stepping in as the church, having these conversations early in marriage, family, with your kids and things like that, as well as continually doing it and modeling it the right way. I just think it's so valuable to try to establish early the way that God has established.
Well, can you talk too about so having the conversations with your kids and it maintaining a continual conversation? So it's not just, well, don't look at this, don't do this. You're more so helping them navigate, it's not the first look, it's the second look. Yeah. Or can you talk a little bit about that from boys specifically?
Yeah, for boys specifically. I mean, I remember having a conversation with Wes recently. I was like, it's natural for you want to see. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how God designed you. So, I mean, you're wanting to see, and I understand that. So there's several thoughts about that. First is that scripturally, guys and girls would get married very young,
right,
in Scripture. And now it's common for people not to marry until they're like 26, 27, 28.
Yeah.
Some later, some earlier, but traditionally our marriage age is getting older.
Right.
Understand some of that. But it literally means that our young people have to navigate the horniest time of their life.
Yep.
And basically the church is saying, don't touch, don't do this, don't do that, just be miserable. Sign up for Jesus today.
That's right.
You can have the greatest life ever, and God will bless you, but if you touch anything, your hand's going to fall off. Like, it's
cut it off.
Yeah, exactly. Cut it off. It's causing you to sin, And so my thing is, like, to ignore that is to ignore reality and how God designed them.
Yep.
And then to not realize that culture is not fighting fair. Like, I mean, Wesley, through his eyes, is seeing things all the time without him ever having to go look for it, that are literally throwing gasoline on that fire.
Well, it's almost like culture is understands the natural way that humans progress. And that's when you start getting hit and bombarded with
and the church is
sex
just out of touch. Right. And so my thing to my boys is like, hey, guys, this is real life.
Yep.
And this is hard. So I'm not telling, I'm going to be in it with you.
Yep.
We're going to walk this thing out together. And you're going to struggle. Like, this is going to be hard. And you're going to make mistakes. But I'm not going to put shame on your mistakes.
That's good.
And so, there's a lot of natural tendencies in it. There's a lot of things. And the shame so often comes, parents put shame on their kids, not meaning to, but what they're actually doing is putting the shame they feel on them onto them.
Right.
And so really it's like, how do Lauren and I get free of the shame? So that then we're not living in shame, trying out of fear to parent. Like, it's just what it is.
Yeah.
Like Wesley and David, they're going to be horny. They're going to struggle with this. How do we get into it with them so that it doesn't give the enemy space in their lives to create shame?
Well, and because the enemy wants to hide everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he wants to put it behind the door, and I think that's the valuable part about what you're talking about, modeling appropriate sexuality, loving on each other openly, because so oftentimes if we're living in reality, they see, hey, we're upset, we're argument, whatever, but then you make up in the bedroom behind the doors, then they're not seeing all these things, and sex becomes this big mystery, and it's hidden. And for young boys, young girls, teenagers, they're interested. They want to go figure it out. And so then they get taught from the world because, they did an internet search or somebody sent them a TikTok video or whatever. Today there's 1,000 different things.
All the TikTok.
And it just
Kill TikTok.
Right.
Destroy the works of the enemy, sent to destroy our youth.
Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it's just... I want to encourage all of our parents, deal in reality.
Yeah.
Please don't deal. I mean, I think the latest statistics that I saw is the percentages, and I'm going to talk about a taboo thing for a second. So if you got young people in the car, you might want to just mute it for a minute, right? This is my 5 seconds to mute.
That's right.
All right. So here's the deal. Like, the percentages of people who masturbate are off the scale.
Yeah.
So please don't live in a world where you're not going to face this with your kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't put shame on them. Get into it with them, because that's so important. And so often when we don't talk, when there's not freedom to talk about stuff with our children, it just gives the enemy a foothold.
Yeah.
And so the Bible is clear about somebody possessing their own vessel. It's unclear about masturbation. I don't care what any theologian says. It doesn't. There's not like some the only passage that I've ever heard is, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. You know what I'm saying? And that's pretty much a misrepresentation of the text, okay? And so what I'm saying to you is, I'm not saying masturbation full on is okay for your kids. What I'm saying is to not realize it's going to be a struggle, and that they are going to need a place to talk and be held accountable and walk through seasons of how do they possess their own vessel. How do they do that with hormones raging, with desire raging, with pornography coming at them? Being in that with them and helping them navigate it imperfectly is really important.
Yeah.
And if we aren't comfortable enough in our sexuality, then we can't do that.
That's right.
And so it's really just important to realize, like, this is reality. I'm not going to bury, like you said, my head in the sand, and it's going to be an ongoing conversation, because I don't want shame to grip his heart. Because when shame begins to come into our heart, then we've given a foothold to the enemy that impacts our lives in other ways.
Yeah. Right.
A lot of anxiety and a lot of those things that are coming into students' lives are because they're carrying around shame. And a lot of it is just the ploy of the enemy that leads them into further darkness, right? So wherever we can allow God's light to shine, then there's freedom that comes, and there's wrestling that takes place, and there's health that follows.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's not comfortable.
No,
I don't.
Jesus, no.
Sounds really easy. Hey, talk to your 8-year-old about sex. Talk to your 14-year-old about it. It's not comfortable, but it's the right work.
Yeah, it's what you got to get into, because it's just coming at them from all angles, and it's just important, and it makes for a much healthier home. And the stories that we've told about my father and the work that we've done, it's a big deal. And I just want to say to our married couples, I know very few couples that are really comfortable about talking about, like, have a good sex life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, we counsel that way beyond pretty much almost everything. And so I'd just say, so the reality is, if your sex life sucks, you're not alone.
Right.
You're par for the course.
That's right.
So, I mean, I hate to say it that way, but, like, that's true. Okay. And so what I'm saying to you is, you don't have to live there, but you're going to have to put in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And what better place to put in the work because sex and marriage is connected to all types of stuff. I mean, it ain't just, it ain't just about sex. I mean, it's also about how we're loving each other and the 5 love languages, which I hate that book, but it's a great book. I just hate it because it always touches something in me, right? So, like, I just wish Lauren loved me the way I wanted to be loved, right? I don't want to love her the way she needs to be loved. I just want to be loved the way I want to be loved. So it's putting in the right work into our marriage that produces life everywhere else.
Well, and sex within the marriage is another thing that's getting bombarded with culture, internet porn, TikTok, back to TikTok. There's this idea that if I get into marriage and my sex life isn't great right off the bat, then something's wrong, which produces shame within yourselves. But the intimacy and the healthy sexuality is that continual, ongoing work, reflection of the love between the two, and it is hard work.
Well, I think, go ahead, you talk, baby.
No, I was just going to give a shout out to our friends
That's right.
Damon and Sarah with the Spicy Marriage podcast.
Spicy Marriage.
That's right.
Listen to that before you make love.
We were just at dinner with them the other night. I was
ready.
like, when is another episode coming out? Of course, we've talked about all types of things with them for so many years, and it's exciting to see them come out with a podcast because so many couples don't talk about these things.
That's right. Yeah. And,
So
and it
they
needs
do
to be. Yeah.
They
That's
do a
definitely
great job of
That's
talking
definitely
about
not one to
the
listen to
comfortable.
with your students.
No.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's a rated R.
That's
I'm trying to get them to go NC-17 on it, but I'm just kidding. But for us, it's just, I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle that if there's any shame between us, and we had a lot of shame because of things that we did outside of marriage, you got to put in the work to allow God's light to shine in those spaces. And sexuality is one of those things, like Paul says, the marriage bed needs to be undefiled, right? And what most scholars would say, and I agree, is that don't bring anybody outside of the marriage into the bedroom, right? So that's very wise. Don't do that. But I would say that most people have opened up a door for there to be a lot of opinions into their sex life. They maybe never let a person in their bed, but they've let voices into their heart. And I think that we are right now culturally is speaking to this marriage and this relationship, and we're comparing our sex life to everybody else's.
That's right.
And I think that's very dangerous, right? Because my job is to build a life with this woman, and it's a healthy life, and it ain't nobody else's life. And our sex life is our sex life. Her desire, my desire, what we like is what we like. And the problem is when I start comparing that to other people's. Now, our job is let's be free with each other, let's pursue healing, and let's have fun.
That's
okay?
good.
And
well,
nobody
what
else
you're
gets to
comparing
do.
it to isn't reality anyway.
No,
It's
it
all
is highlight
perceived.
reels.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And so, or it's everybody's unhealth. I mean, we have a tendency to compare ourselves to unhealthy people all the time, so we feel better about ourselves. That's right. We got to win somewhere.
We feel
they're
bad.
having sex once a year.
Right.
We're winning.
Find some way that you
right.
win. That's right.
And so it's really just
What
saying,
better place to win? I mean,
but life impacts sex more than anything. And so, people don't, really process that as, our kids. I mean, we're raising a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old. So, I mean, they're both playing baseball right now. I mean, we looked at our calendar. We do a weekly calendar meeting that was depressing this week. I mean, I'm outside the house, and this is not typical. But this week, I'm, out of the house 5 nights this week.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, to be frank with you, sex is going to be hard to come by this week. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be tough because...
no, it's not. It's
Did
not.
y'all hear that? I want everybody to hear that. That camera right there, you better... Right there. Did you hear that? There's a testimony right there.
This was a whole discussion.
I'm taking that to the
night.
bank. So this is how you get Lauren, is that you just say it ain't going to happen, and then her passionate side yes, it is. And I'm like, when?
Don't tell me something's not going to happen.
Exactly. Oh, Oh, praise the Lord. I receive that blessing. But anyway, and so getting that place of like really seeing life, which is a whole lot easier. I mean, I sound like a professional right now, but I struggle with it the most, because last night I was mad. I was like, we're so busy this week, we're never going to be able to connect. Where is God gone in all this storm? Where are you, God? I'm all alone. And so getting that place that we just realize that the age and stage and things that happen with our bodies and life and schedules, they're real. But this is our life together, and we need to stop comparing our life.
Well, I think that's a great point, too, because if you want to have healthy sexuality within your marriage, sex has to be a priority, a healthy priority. And so you look at a schedule and it's like it's busy this week. I think so oftentimes sex and that connection within sex is the first thing to go. Yeah. It's the first thing to say, hey, we don't have to do that this week.
Yep.
But I think we also have to be careful because sex absolutely needs to be a priority, right? But even saying that makes it sound like a task.
Right. That's right.
Right? And healthy sex is fun sex.
Mm-hmm.
Now, talk about that for a second, because you're big about that fun sex. You're big about like, let's have fun, and if this ain't fun, we don't really want to do it.
Oh yeah. What was the word? Gosh, we were just talking about this with Damon and Sarah the other night. I can't remember.
Intentional?
Yeah, maybe, but
that
kind of the opposite
no.
of that. Well, I'm thinking of the other side of the coin, where it's just like you're checking it off a list, or
it becomes a chore.
Yeah, you doing it out of duty or whatever, or just you come up with, we're gonna do it 5 times this week, or we're gonna do it 1 time this week. Whatever the goal is, whatever that number is between you and your spouse, that kind of misses the whole point. Like
Correct.
The whole point is connection.
Yep.
And I remember Jimmy Evans saying, every time you have sex with your spouse, you're renewing your vows.
That's good.
Because that's what it is
exactly
about.
Right.
It is about reproduction, yes, but we're way beyond that.
Praise the Lord.
Okay. No more.
We have sex for fun now. That's what we do. It is a pure enjoyment sport around our house.
Yeah, but the biggest libido killer is like, well, let's pencil it in for this day, this time.
That's right.
I hate that.
All the
Absolutely
type A, all the type people just were like,
which is
cringe.
so not so opposite from a personality. My
That's right.
calendar is like by the hour to the T.
That's right.
Jake's laughing because he works with me. I mean, there's not anything that I just do by happenstance.
And I'm the most laid back person in the world, except with sex. I'm the most.
Y'all flip.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it totally flipped.
Weird?
I'm like, we scheduled it. You have to do it. Smile. It's going to be good.
The only time that Lauren looks at Aaron and says, would you just relax? Just chill out a little bit.
He literally said that the other night. Relax. I'm like, I can't. It needs to be good.
But isn't that funny? That's how our personalities are. They like switch.
So now, the practicality of it is that we do schedule it, but we schedule it for a window of time.
Yeah. I think it goes back to something that often, it gets talked about, but I don't think it gets talked about in depth enough communication is 85% of it.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to talk about it, what you like, what you don't like, are your needs getting met, how often, frequency. It's all of those things. It's not just when.
That's right. Yeah, and it's about connection, because a lot of so several things is that we do have a business meeting every week. It's not about sex. It's about our calendar. It's about a lot of different things, but sex is a part of that meeting. So we say, when are we going to try to connect? You know what I'm saying? And we have a certain rhythm that I really like to stay in. And so we have that conversation, and when are windows of time? When are times that more quick experiences can happen, and when are times that more, in-depth experiences can happen? For me, in-depth is it's not a romance novel depth, I promise. Right? We're overachieving. And so those conversations are really important. But it's also like a lot of people don't realize that spouses don't just connect hormonally or need a release. They also need connection.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So sex is about feeling wanted for really both. It's not just about getting off.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So there's a physical need, but there's also a spiritual connection need. And you can meet one of those needs and not meet the other, which leaves the partner thirsty.
That's right.
Well, I think that was something new for me as women, oftentimes, not every woman, but most statistics say that most women need to connect emotionally before connecting physically. And for me, it was interesting to learn that guys are the opposite.
No,
that
we can connect anytime.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Totally trying to steal my thunder.
No, good.
No, I would love to hear you talk more about that.
No, you got it. You go for it. No.
I just think it's interesting that we're built differently that way.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, a constant challenge to figure out that rhythm of that.
Well, I think that's the constant challenge, but it's also the beauty in what you are talking about, connecting. Because in order to connect, what you're really doing is saying, hey, I'm going to value your needs and your wants over mine. Yeah. And when you have two people that do that, that's when that intimacy, the connection, and frankly, the sex is just better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you are choosing that. It goes back to that marriage covenant. All of that is the beauty found within that is that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sex should be the outcome of a healthy marriage. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily what makes up one.
Yeah. So
it's a part of the puzzle, but it's really, it's us putting in the work so that you feel safe, I feel safe, she feels heard, sex is really like the icing on the cake. It's not really the cake, and it's a group. It's important. Nobody cake without icing.
Who wants that?
Who wants that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is that place of realizing, okay, this is really a sum of what's taking place. So my probably advice would be if the sex isn't good, right, then what in the marriage is broken?
That's right. That's good.
That's really what in me is broken, because when you look at that, then it doesn't become so territorial. And there's a lot of people that are using sex as a weapon, or it's a duty, or it's a job, or it's you're not willing to do what I want to do. I want to experiment. I want to do those things. And it's more all right, what's broken in the person or the marriage that isn't allowing us to be free in bed? Mm-hmm. And that's probably a real honest thought.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what you were saying, Jake, about it. Again, I know I've said Jimmy Evans 50 times.
Yeah, we listen to Jimmy Evans a lot.
His marriage podcast is really, really good. But he talks about how the best case scenario is when you have two servants together in a marriage. Mm-hmm. And the worst case is when you have two selfish people in the marriage. Yeah. And so it's... there's some seasons where I give 75%, Aaron may give 25%. Mm-hmm. There's some seasons where I give 25%, you give 75%. But it has to go back to serving each other in all capacities, not just that.
Well, I think it's also important. I know we keep on talking about this meeting we have every week. But, we're both senior pastors. We have two young kids. And so there's weeks that she's carrying more at home than I am, which this is one of those weeks. But we're in this together. And then there's weeks that I'm carrying more at home than she is. And we're in this together. So it's not, what I'm saying? So it's really us working through it and figuring out. And we realized this week early on, we're this is going to be a really hard week. Mm-hmm. I'm recording 5 podcasts, 3-4 dinners. We have pastors in town. We have Pastor Brady coming. It is wild.
It's all fun stuff, though.
Yeah, and it's great. But it's really saying, okay, let's set the expectation for this week, so that we can still be a healthy family. And that just means communication. But it took us a lot of work to be able to communicate.
Yeah, I want to make sure we're crystal clear. This did not start off so great. Yeah. it really didn't. And a lot of the work that we've put in and where we are today actually stemmed from my parents' divorce.
Yeah.
Because we started marriage counseling thinking it was going to be about talking about their stuff. And inevitably it came out that we had our own issues we needed to talk through.
Yeah.
So that was back in 2017, 2018. So I definitely don't want to mislead anybody that this is just, we've been together 23 years, but married almost 19. So for the first however many years, I mean, this wasn't, it doesn't come easy to anybody.
No.
And so you have to put in the work, and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
It's why we talk about so much marriage counseling, and we see a marriage counselor twice a year that we found, and we send other people to that same counselor. And we went through a season of time where we knew that trust had been broken in our lives with parents and things like that. And we've gone through a hard 7-year period. I mean, there was the last 7 years of our lives, we've had a lot of trauma. My dad dying, divorce happening, stuff with David. I mean, it feels like what could go wrong in the last 7 years has gone wrong. On top of that, the church just growing and blowing up, and staff, and it's been good on a lot of fronts, but I think a lot of people look at it from the outside and they're like, oh, they've got all this together. But in truth, I would say the most monumental moments in our life have been the traumas or the storms that we faced. And so what we realized is that trust had gone out. We just didn't know that trust was dissolving between us. I mean, we hadn't done anything to each other. But, there was no trust here. I mean, I was reading a self-help book.
I hate that book.
Yeah, I was reading Emotional Intelligence. So Erin was becoming emotionally intelligent, all right? And she was like, "You're changing." And I was like, "I'm trying to get better." And she was like, "I can't deal with change right now. Everything's changing." And I was like, And so we found that we didn't trust each other, and we had to work on communication. And so we went to these counselors and learned skills. I was
going to say, it all goes back to the skills.
It does. And I think that's what's so frustrating for us, is that we had grown up in church, but we didn't know how to be married. And I think that really doing the work together, and there's just so many times in our life that we get busy and we don't put work to the right things.
That's good.
And this is worth working on. I love her. She loves me. But I would tell you that's not enough. I would tell you that love that isn't being nurtured, grown, and put work to is not enough. And so it takes work to stay in love.
Yeah.
And love does produce wonderful things for our family, for our boys, for our church. I mean, we'd say that the number one thing that we can give this church is a healthy marriage.
Definitely.
One that's not fake, that's not under pretense. We're imperfect. I mean, Lauren still gets it wrong quite often. But
so much I want to say.
No, everybody online's like, please say it.
Please
say it. But it's just we're just very imperfect, and we get that. Don't look at us as examples. Just realize that our biggest testimony is put in the work.
Do the work.
Work
on it.
That's right.
That's so good. Well, thank you, Pastor Lauren, for being on.
You're welcome.
Thank you, baby.
To talk. I know this is Pastor Aaron's favorite, so he got his sweetheart with him.
I do.
He roped me into this somehow.
I feel much better when she's close.
That's right.
I'll be honest with you. Maybe she should be on here all the time.
Maybe so.
You think we could draft you from the Renew Women's podcast?
I think that Pastor Gina might fight you.
Yeah, I might end up with a horse head in my bed. For those of you who don't know, that's a Godfather reference. Okay, that's right. All right. That's right. Sounds good. Thank you, Jacob.
This has been a good one.
All right.
Can I get a good amen here?
Amen.